started. So my name is Anil Carmel. I am the president of the CSA DC chapter. So we're getting started about 15 minutes past our normal time, just based on the fact that I understand there is a accident on the inner loop of the Beltway. So unfortunately, that probably has impacted the folks that are trying to get here, but all our speakers are here, so which is fantastic. That's the most important thing. But of course, we appreciate you guys taking the time to come here for our meetup. So I'll tell you a little bit about our chapter. Again, appreciate you guys all being here. For those that are not familiar with the Cloud Security Alliance, the Cloud Security Alliance is a nonprofit focused on building security best practices for next generation IT. It was founded in 2009 with headquarters in Seattle. There's 92,000 individual members, over 80 plus chapters. This is the Washington, D.C. metro area chapter. We're almost a year old, so come this summer will be about our first year of being in operation. We've got 35 plus working groups and 400 plus corporate members. So who belongs to CSA? It's the world leading cloud providers. We've got thought leaders from across the industry, several of which you're going to hear from today. We've got over 50 global financial services companies and top system integrators and the big four. So philosophy of CSA is it is indeed vendor neutral. So there's no agenda that's being pushed by CSA. It's disseminating research widely on the CSA website. The research that you see there is free. It doesn't cost you anything to get. And it really is grassroots. So it's taking folks that really want to solve fundamental problems from a cybersecurity perspective and applying them in these working groups. So I actually personally lead the application containerization and microservices working group. So, and it's all volunteer driven from a working group perspective. So we're not being paid by CSA. We're all volunteers, and that applies to those of us in the chapter. We're all volunteers that are leading this chapter. We're not being paid by anyone. It is a volunteer-led effort. There are a couple certifications that CSA offers. The Certificate of Cloud Security Knowledge, a CCSK. There is a registry called a STAR, which is analogous to FedRAMP, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that interplay actually means a little bit later, and you'll actually hear a lot more about that at a forum this summer. So with that, a thank you to our sponsors. We'll start with the space that we're in. So first off, thank you very much to MITRE for providing us this space. Our board member, Mari, helped us with that. And then certainly want to thank our platinum, gold, and silver sponsors, Apparetto, Fugue, and CloudCheckr. Let's give a round of applause for our sponsors. We wouldn't be here without the benefits of our sponsors providing us the food and, of course, the facilities to be able to have this kind of conversation. So with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our mission. Who are we? Why are we here? What problems are we trying to solve? So with that, why a CSA chapter? Well, if you all are familiar, late last year, a national cyber strategy was released to protect the American people, homeland, American way of life. And really, how does that strategy, for those of us that live in this area, apply to those of us that serve this community, right? Coupled with the DoD cyber strategy. Well, we're here at MITRE, right? So how do we apply federal cyber strategies to the organizations in which we serve, right? You've got Cloud Smart. How do we securely move systems to the cloud, right? So the topic of the day today is leveraging security to accelerate cloud adoption. So with that, you're going to hear from several speakers around how we can take these policies and these approaches and leverage security to actually increase cloud adoption. So, really our chapter is focused on heavily regulated industries. While the government, the federal government, is the largest employer in the DC metro area, it's not the only employer in the DC metro area. Capital One is right here around the corner in our backyard, a very large financial company. Healthcare is a big employer here in this area as well. Really we're focused on heavily regulated industries in this DC metropolitan area. There's new legislation that's driving IT modernization from a government perspective. Those of you familiar with MGT, the MGT has been out for about a year and is continuing to show progress. And the fact of the matter is the adversaries to all of these different environments are increasing at an exponential rate. So how do we stay one step ahead of our adversaries? So again, our focus is on heavily regulated industries and influencing policy and IT security regulations, and then focusing on privacy. And we'll talk a little bit more about what privacy means. You're hearing a lot about GDPR and what's going on in Europe. We're actually going to talk a bit more about that near the end of this conversation. So we want to provide guidance for IT modernization, and one of the core goals of our chapters is to develop position papers to modernize some of our outdated IT security regulations and to create new regulations where some don't exist. You know, for example, you know, you have engineers today that that develop standards around bridges, right? They're certified engineers, right? So do we have similar licensure for folks that are developing software for some of our critical systems, like cars, for example, right? As cars go from level 1 to level 4 automation, right? What kind of licensure is in place for those people developing the software that are going to make our cars automated, right? So it's those types of things when we're thinking about what kind of regulations, what kind of licensure do we need to think about how we as a chapter can write position papers to help influence the folks that are in this area to make better decisions. So with that, like I said, I serve as the president. We have several board members here physically in the room. For those of you that are in the room, board members, please raise your hand. And actually, one of our board members, unfortunately, is leaving our DC metro area. So Jacqueline is moving out to Arizona. So thank you so much for your service. We really appreciate it. But we are all volunteers, and we would not be able to do what we do without our events and sponsorship committee. So thank you specifically to Kim Lessard in the back and Judah Bennett for taking care of all of our sponsorships and events. So really appreciate your efforts. This is a group that, again, we're all volunteers. We're volunteering our time to put on an event like this. So how do you all get involved? So we have several working groups that we're spinning up to solve some of these problems, right? We really are going to need everyone's help in this area. We're trying to do this collaboratively, right? This is not something that's like paid research. It's actually volunteer research. We host these meetups roughly on a quarterly basis. We'll talk about what the next one looks like at the end of this conversation. We do need sponsors, so we absolutely, this is all sponsor-driven, sponsor-led. So the sponsors are what provides us the refreshments and the facilities and whatnot, so we certainly do need that. Where do you sign up? So the CSA DC Meetup, it's free to join. We've got almost 500 folks in the meetup, I think, thus far, and we also have a LinkedIn group with almost 1,000 people signed up. So if you haven't signed up to either one of those, please do sign up. That's where we're going to be posting information about our new events and ways to get involved in specifically around those working groups that we talked about when we spin those up. We do have an email list on our website. It's cloudsecurityalliance-dc.org is our website. So if you want to sign up on our email list, that'll be great. And our Twitter is CloudSADC. So with all that said, the CSA Federal Summit is free for feds. It is Tuesday, May 7th at the Marriott Metro Convention Center. If you haven't signed up yet, highly encourage you to do so. I do not know. The person that is supposed to speak to that is stuck in that traffic on the inner loop of the Beltway. So unfortunately, I can't answer that, but I can say that it is free to feds. If she gets here, then she can answer that question. But it is definitely free to feds. So I can say that much. Registration for that is cloudsecurityalliance.org/events. And that is a fantastic thing about technology. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Thank you, Google. Awesome. All right. So with that, enough from me. We want to hand it over to our sponsors to kick off this conversation. It's all around the lens of leveraging security to accelerate cloud adoption. So Jody Scott is here to talk to us about, he's the Director of Sales Engineering for Apparetto, to talk to us about that topic. So thank you, Jody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Hear me? Slide. Do I have to click or you just tell you? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruben. So my name is Jody Scott, and I'm talking to you guys today about Appretto. And Appretto, we are an application/network segmentation company based on application identity. So let me get into that, what I mean by application identity and why I'm talking about eliminating IP addresses when it comes to security. So I'll back up a little bit and let's talk about the problem statement. The problem statement, or the problem that we've had for the longest time is, from attackers and so on, is lateral attacks. This is, we have firewalls, this big firewall device and so on at the very top of our network, north-southbound. And the idea is that this is going to protect us from the threats. The problem is that the bad guys don't come in necessarily through that firewall. They come in and go around it. How? Internal attacks. People walk into the data center with a laptop. In the cloud, we have the same equivalent as well. Basically, somebody comes in through a VPN. Somebody comes into it and compromises an application and then moves laterally. So they compromise the low value of application and then move laterally. We've seen this attack vector with both Target, for instance, where the attackers came in through the VPN account. We've seen it with Equifax, where they came in through an Apache Struts vulnerability and then moved laterally to own more of the organization. The problem is firewalls protect borders. They don't protect applications. The other thing that we're really seeing is obviously is the growth of the cloud, right? We're seeing things like containers, serverless functions, and so on. The problem, what's changed with these is they come into existence. They're very ephemeral. They come in and out of existence very rapidly. So basically basing our security around IP is a big problem. IP addresses and so on, it's a very short-lived, sometimes only a few minutes or a few seconds and so on. And as we explode in this, the ability of basically building out policy based on, by creating IP ACLs and so on, is no longer holds true. So the other thing that we've actually for the longest time have based security on is basically is the idea or concept that IP is identity. Unfortunately, this is not the case. IP is a network primitive. It requires that we trust the network. We would advocate that we don't trust the network, zero trust. That with an IP address, basing your IP on identity on IPs, breaks through network address translation, through proxies, and so on. It doesn't solve those whenever the users basically get added to a same IP address and so on. It has little context. All it is an IP. It gives us no additional information or what have you. So what we do at Appretto is we take and we decouple the security from the network and we directly attach it to the application. So now it moves with the application. We do this at both all the way across the stack, layer 3, layer 4s to layer 7. So at our very low basis layer 3, we modify TCP, UDP, and so on to exchange cryptographic identity to only allow a flow to basically be set up if both sides agree based on the identity of both sides in cryptography. Up to layer 7, where we can actually get involved in the API operations as to what the user is or not allowed to call what API call, and so on with the given operation. So what we've done is we've completely decoupled from the infrastructure, so now we can move our applications and some workloads and so on around the cloud, data center, private data center to cloud, cloud to cloud, cloud to edge, and so on rapidly without having to worry about having our network team involved or taking the time to provision IPsec tunnels and VPNs and so on. Now we can rapidly provision our basically whatever our DevOps or operations team is doing. Security is automatically and always in compliance and automatic, and we no longer have to basically involve those other teams to make and bring it into compliance. It always is in compliance. And we do this all based, instead of on IP addresses, we base it on identity, so that everything has identity. Every application is composed of workloads, and every workload has identity. We automatically generate this workload identity based on all the information that could be things like usernames, group names, MD5 hash sums, running binaries, to the cloud that it's running on, Amazon, Azure, Google, and so on. We consume all that information to create identity, uniqueness, including things like integrating with your Tenable or Qualys for threat vulnerabilities and so on. It creates identity, and we base it on that. The other thing that we do is we've realized that, like in a lot of security solutions, they gear towards a particular silo. The CISO, the operations, or developers, and so on. This is a problem. So a lot of your solutions that you're out there seeing are basically targeting towards the developers, and they're basically they're not basically involving the CISO, or they're targeted towards the CISO and they're not involving the developer. We consider this to be a problem. We need to integrate these better. And with Appretto, we have a hierarchical governance model. We're big on this, so that your CISO has involved, your operations team is involved, your developer is involved. Everybody's involved in security. So your CISO can create policies that cannot be overridden lower levels. Your operations can create policies that are not overridden by your developers. And ultimately, when we look at what any application does, say especially as we go towards microservices, who knows what microservice should not be able to talk or should be able to talk to a different microservice and what it should be able to do? The developer. The developer is the only one with that context. So everyone has a hand in the security. So we need a multi-governance model, and that's what we've delivered at Apparetto. So some of the buzzwords that you guys might hear and so on that kind of like out there, like which kind of relate to us and so on, are things like network segmentation, micro segmentation, next generation firewall. Not a big fan, but it is that's a word, that kind of phrase out there. API serverless, authentication, authorization, accounting, Kubernetes, and Docker. So, any questions? Yes.
So do you interact? Do you integrate with
So similar to SPIFFE, we actually are SPIFFE compliant ultimately, but where SPIFFE and so on is going to be, basically concerned about a service. And so anything within that service is okay. We're actually going to go down into that because we actually want to control what microservices actually do within a service even. So we want to abstract that. What we ultimately do is we no longer care about basically managing your security from sort of you don't manage it at AWS and Azure and within Kubernetes and so on. Instead, you simply manage it at a higher level abstraction. And it no longer matters where it is actually within that. So it could be two containers that are initially trying to talk within the same Kubernetes cluster in the same namespace, or it could all of a sudden be two containers that are trying to talk in different namespaces, or one of them is not even a container. It's completely something legacy database or what have you.
And follow up on that, the principles for the identity, do they call home and ask you who they are, the pods, or do you provide principles somewhere that they know who they are?
Right, so they do know who they are, so we never have to call home. Whenever it starts up and is initialized, at that point, we have a concept. We have an agent. The agent's running locally on the box and so on. Initially, when it will register with the backend, it will quote call home to initially to register. It will at that point it'll generate a public-private key. It will generate a certificate request for signing request. That gets signed by us. We're basically running a CA behind that background. That comes back down to that box. That private key never left it. Now that box is using that private key will assert who it is and attest to who it is. And then we'll automatically rotate that key every couple hours. So that private key never left the box, and so it only remains in memory. And then whenever that, we automatically also rotate it. It's a configurable option, but by default we rotate it every 2 hours. Mm-hmm. So we ultimately secure the workloads regardless of if it's running on Kubernetes or if it's Docker Swarm on Kubernetes, or if it's a serverless function, a Lambda function, or if it's a traditional native process, native workload, and so on. So we'll secure that workload.
Last questions? Not Jody will be here afterwards. So thank you very much, Jody. All right, fantastic. Yes. Did I not? Okay, let me do that real quick. So while we're doing that, we'll go ahead and get ready for the next speaker. So next speaker is, let's see, give me a second here. There is nothing there. All right. Okay. So for our next speaker, go to this deck. Ta-da! All right. So our next speaker is our gold sponsor, Fugue. So we are honored to have Philip Merrick, the Chief Executive Officer of Fugue, to share a story about leveraging security to accelerate cloud adoption. Please welcome Philip.
Thanks very much, Anil. So the original plan was for our CTO and co-founder, Josh Steller, to be giving this lightning talk, but he's in Maryland on the other side of all that mess. So I'm doing the lightning talk here. The good news is I only have 73 slides. We can get through that pretty quickly, right? Actually, given the logistics and it being a lightning talk, I'll try to make it a lightning talk. First of all, we got involved with Cloud Security Alliance just last year, and already have started to see a ton of value in really getting involved. If you're not involved, I'd really encourage that. Several of our folks have gotten engaged with the working group, several of the working groups, seeing a lot of value with that. Just today, we actually co-presented a webinar with CSA, very well attended, on the risks of cloud misconfiguration and what you can do about that. And that's, no surprise, actually aligned with what we do at Fugue. Some of you might be thinking, it's like, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It is Fugue, be careful. And our founders, aside of being great technologists and security folks out of places like AWS, are also musicians, and a fugue is a piece of music. Bach wrote rather a lot of them, so that's where it comes from. So what we do is we are in the cloud infrastructure, security, and compliance space. What that means is we ensure that your cloud infrastructure stays in continuous compliance with your enterprise security policies, whether those are derived from well-established frameworks like NIST, or even industry-specific ones like PCI, or some superset of a whole bunch, GDPR, the CIS benchmarks, and so forth. We make sure that, to begin with, your developers and DevOps people are developing and deploying compliant infrastructure, and we then carry that through the full life cycle and make sure that at runtime there's no drift from the established baseline that you've shown to be compliant earlier in the process. And there are a number of other companies that do this or are in the general space, but our approach is really very different. We built a bunch of technology for self-healing infrastructure for certain government customers around this area, and we're now taking this into the commercial world. And so what we do is, instead of doing blind scanning of cloud infrastructure and looking for all of the resources and the S3 buckets and EC2 instances and looking at the security groups and all that, we certainly do all of that, but instead of just doing a blind scan, we start with the idea of a compliant baseline. So we establish a baseline for your configuration, and that's the contract that literally keeps everybody on the same page. So there's talk of DevSecOps, and please let's not put any more 3 letters into that. It's full. The word is full. But seriously, there's a big push to literally get developers, DevOps, and the security teams on the same page. We think the same page is a baseline configuration that everybody agrees is compliant from the get-go. And then once we've got that in place, at runtime, we use that self-healing infrastructure technology to look for drift against the baseline. And then when we find events that change, the S3 bucket that should be private opened up to the world, people opening up ports on EC2 instances, messing with security groups, all of that we detect as drift. We alert you to it, but we can also optionally go back to that baseline. So full automated remediation without having to write any code. So companies that have actually been working in the cloud for quite a while and have significant and important workloads in the cloud have realized that this problem of configuration drift, putting you out of compliance with your policies, leaving vulnerabilities, it's a huge, huge exposure, and they've been addressing it with various tools that then call up, in some cases, a bunch of Lambda scripts that they write, effectively bots that try to change things back. But this is a very unsustainable and brittle approach. And using this idea of baselines and being able to remediate back to a baseline, we're able to save you from having to write that code and maintain that code, and you avoid having a very, very brittle and vulnerable infrastructure. So that's what we do at Fugue: cloud infrastructure, security, and compliance. F-U-G-U-E, pronounce Fugue. And it's great to be here, and thank you to MITRE for hosting, and thank you to Anil for actually getting this DC chapter kicked off. Great to be here. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Fantastic. Thank you, Philip. Appreciate that. All right. So with that, that brings us to our first CXO Lightning Talk. So it is my honor to introduce Mark McIntyre. He is the Chief Security Advisor for Microsoft Cybersecurity Solutions. So Mark has also prior government experience serving in the government. So with that, please give a round of applause to our first CXO Lightning speaker, Mark McIntyre.
Oh, right there, okay. Awesome. Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, oh yeah, you want that one, that's right. Perfect, awesome. So, it's a new one, I gotta figure out how to use this. So my name is Mark McIntyre. I live in Seattle. So I'm here every like 2 weeks. I'm from here, used to live here. It'd be easier to move back here. I just don't want to do it right now. Anyway, so keep my email. I have cards. Please call me, email me with any questions. Very happy to follow up anyway possible. And I'll just echo what's been said previously. It's awesome that this chapter stood up. I made the assumption it's been up like for 5-10 years. And so this is great. Being in Seattle, I was part of the main chapter, and I never knew any different. So this is great. So I have a few minutes to talk about security and cloud. And let me get the right one here. Which one's the big one? There we go. Okay. So really, this is more to me of and first of all, this is a great opportunity. Security can be a scary conversation. Careers are made and broken on it. But business must go on. Not even 10 minutes ago, Microsoft's global CISO, Brett Arsenault, put an article on LinkedIn, something like 95% of breached records out there are from government, retail, and tech. So like it couldn't be more prescient for us, right? So, but this is a way to think about, why we're here. This is a way to think about why I think, or why cloud is and will be increasingly important to our business strategies, whether you're a corporation, government, what have you. So this is a map of the internet, picture being 1,000 words. And this is a couple of years old, of course. But, if you look at it, I think you can kind of get what it means. The big boxes like, .us, .cn, .in, that's just more population, more user base, is bigger user base. And then the shade of green, like, for example, Argentina being darker than Bolivia, or, South Africa not as a little lighter than Kenya. That's penetration of internet. And so, broadly speaking, these colors, these numbers reflect, economic growth, GDP, things like that. This is 15, so the important part is here. Let's jump ahead. This is 25. So, what you see clear, steady growth, I would say even outsized growth in so-called emerging markets, kind of an unfair term. But, South America, Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia. What you don't really see is any more growth in North America or Europe. Incremental growth at best. Because population, demographics, and because generally speaking, we are already at full capacity. And so, and by the way, I spent a long time in the US government living in some of these countries, and I don't ever miss a chance to show this to the US government. I did a keynote last week at our National Security Symposium And I didn't really get past this slide because it was implications for anyone who cares about the world. So if you're a U.S. company, this is awesome. This is a way to visualize tomorrow's marketplace. If you're a CERT, a responder team, not so good news, because not many of us are prepared. We're not putting our people, we're not putting our infrastructure, we're not thinking about alliances and business partnerships. We're not thinking about how the regulators in those countries think about cloud and security and IT in general, or legal frameworks. I think I heard someone mention that earlier. Legal frameworks are not going to be as advanced or as mature as what we would expect in terms of how we operate our businesses. If you're the U.S. government, or if you're a contractor here servicing the U.S. government, think about where state needs to put diplomatic facilities or pre-positioned infrastructure or services. Obviously, if you're servicing the military or the IC, you think about where they're going to be involved, where are tomorrow's hotspots. It's quite possible that tomorrow's adversaries are in one of these countries, and the economics around offensive cyber are too attractive to pass up. If I were Kim Jong-un, or if I were, emerging leader and I wanted to poke my neighbors, I wanted to project power or defend my borders, I would do cyber. It's cheap and easy. It's like 97 cents for 1,000 credentials, something like that. There's a whole very sophisticated attack service economy. I might have a slide, I'm not sure, but I hope I do. So this is just a way to think about the marketplace. And then here, yeah, of course. This one. Oh, okay, sure. Oh, by the way, just the reason why some of these are in white is just top 10 markets, like India, China, Pakistan, Nigeria, things like that. So here's here's tomorrow's marketplaces, and this is where cloud comes in. We have more users coming online. We have more devices. 200 billion. The number will probably go higher, and we have this massive, almost incomprehensible surge in data. For that reason, it will, not to be flippant, it will generally be impossible for you to run your business and run your infrastructure. You're going to have to consider going more to a cloud provider just to be able to afford a lot of this. And security is case in point. Like in our company's case, we're collecting something like, you think about Microsoft's collection around the world: mailboxes, identity, devices, desktop infrastructure, SaaS apps. We have like 6 trillion events a day, something like that we collect. And we've moved, generally speaking, all of our collection and detection capabilities to the cloud because it was literally bankrupting our internal security teams to keep asking for more servers. Anyway, just a good chance to think about marketplaces, opportunities. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I had this up there. In our case, this is why we are building data centers all around the world. Other companies, AWS, Google, others are probably doing, much the same. So here's some I think it's just pretty relevant data as to what the opportunities are going to be for us out there. Of course, here's the issue. We have all these different things that are connected. I read a stat. I didn't believe this statistic until I had to double check on it. But I saw it at the RSA conference. And the cost of a breach for an enterprise level customer by 2020 will be, I couldn't believe this, but around $100 million. And that's, I know, I see people shaking their heads. I didn't believe it. I said, no way. For a few reasons. Number one, and I have the third-party research. Number one, the liability. Number two, the fact that even unlike now or 5 years ago, a breach against one company does not affect just that company. It affects everyone in their supply chain, in their ecosystem. Not everyone, but it affects a lot of their supply chain and ecosystem. So there's, just massive, great opportunities here. Data is increasingly going to be how we all, how our businesses succeed. How well can you collect data, correlate it, put resources against it to make incremental improvements in your supply chain, in your retention, in your security for sure, in your marketing, your communications, everything. And so coming out of this change in the ecosystem, this is good news. We have this awesome ecosystem of, well-intentioned, first-rate security companies out there. A lot of us are in them, but this really is not sustainable. And so you're going to see more consolidation here. And for example, in our own company, our own CISO, Brett Arsenault, he's been very vocal. He's made a commitment to our board of directors. He talks readily to his CISO counterparts in the U.S. government and around industry about the fact that we were a big offender. We had just because of large company bureaucracy and such, we had made ourselves dependent on over 120 different third-party security companies. And so we would be in different parts of Microsoft would buy licenses from the same company, and it's just not efficient. And it was shadow IT and all that. So going to the cloud more gave us a chance internally to take stock of our supply chain. And so Mr. Arsenault made a commitment to the board that, and of course, John Thompson is the CEO, chairman of the board, longtime Symantec CEO. So made a commitment that we would reduce our third-party security vendor supply chain by about by 60, let's say half, in 3 years. And as we go more and more to the cloud, as we do more and more of our own security through our own technologies, the way that we're actually accelerating that displacement. We're down, like we've really eliminated 80 in 2 years. We just keep finding more and more opportunities, which means that I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes and yes. So we are definitely taking on more and more of it ourselves. Not everything, of course. Like for example, risk management, risk compliance. Don't ever come to us, ask us to build a risk management solution for you. Just we use Archer. But generally speaking, we're doing more and more of this ourselves. Now, what I want to say here is very delicate because there's a great innovation out there. And so none of this is meant to disparage any security company out there. These are hardworking people. And of course, I think a lot of us in security know that no matter how fiercely when we might compete, when it comes to protecting users, we all work together, right? And so, but in our case, we made a conscious decision to increase our investments in security, so well over $1 billion a year in R&D, so that we think we can make ourselves more secure. I'll say our customers and partners, by standardizing more around technologies that we're developing. But where you already have third-party investments or where there's a really interesting startups, younger companies, we want to make sure that our technologies also communicate and work play nice with third-party. So that way we can respect your legacy, your current investments, give you all the choices you need while helping you standardize. And one of the challenges, this is from Gartner actually, so this is not confidential at all. But this is kind of interesting. There's Gartner's identified I think it's called the digital adoption market. It's 40-some billion-dollar marketplace, generally focused on consulting companies. But anyway, there's this challenge where there is this really, really cool innovation out there in the industry, but it's occurring too quickly. The average, many security teams, CISO teams, have trouble enough using what they already own, let alone incorporating more and more tools, especially tools that don't necessarily communicate. So something to think about, when you're talking to a security team, understanding that they've already done all their training investments around a certain platform, around a certain appliance, a certain tool. We all need to make sure that we go into this CISO team, whoever, and give them, help them understand how we can also help them not only use this because it's a good technology, but deploy it and actually get value out of it.
Sort of exploit in this context means to utilize rather than misuse, correct?
Gartner said exploit, not me. No. Yeah. It's a good slide though. It's actually, I'll give you another stat so every year our CISO hosts a CISO summit in Seattle, 200, 300 or so commercial. Unfortunately, PubSec CISOs don't get invited, partly because of compliance, just all the hassle, typical, but also because, generally speaking, no offense to anybody, PubSec CISOs typically don't talk. They won't share with the CISO from Coca-Cola or Ford or Lufthansa, whoever it is. But anyway, a fascinating and troubling statistic that in the last year, this is about 6 months ago, so let's go back 18 months, 95% of data loss events that these CISOs in this summit tallied somehow occurred because of people like us. Just reasonably smart people trying to do the right thing. No one's being malicious, I hope. We're just trying to work, right? And so, so humans generally account for the cyber loss events out there. We're the eighth OSI layer. The percentage of CISO budget dedicated to training and preparing your people, about 1.5%. So there's this massive disconnect between industry innovation, for all the right reasons, industry innovation and preparing people to actually use technology. And then, we always point to this. There's I should have brought the better one is the pizza as a service. That's like, go online, just look up pizza as a service, and if you can't understand that, it's just so easy to understand, and it makes you hungry. So this is a great way to think about some of the benefits, the data, the business benefits of doing more in the cloud certainly are there for you. Great way to rationalize capital expenditures, great way to identify shadow IT, work old systems out of your environment, great way to encourage innovation all around the world. And as you go more into the cloud, you also have a great chance to, I don't want to say transfer. Transfer implies you don't own the risk. Great way to transfer what's the responsibility of certain parts of your organization to your security partners, literally all the way up, into SaaS. And so even just presentations I've already heard, there's so much cool innovation designed to helping, companies in this room. We can do more of this for our customers in a way that will give them more secure configurations up front, instant automated compliance management. I mean, these are great tools. It's awesome to see it, and it can really make a difference here. Oh, and one thing I want to just put out there is we have this thing called the graph. We don't sell it, so there's no upsell here. There's no cheap marketing. I encourage anyone here, go on our site, just go to our website, type this in. We don't sell it. It is there. There's an API called the Graph Security API. We launched this API. Some of you, anyone from MITRE here? You might know it as Interflow. And so we launched this several months ago with the idea, what's that? Well, no, but I mean like the actual company. So for example, we launched this with Palo Alto and with Anomaly and two others, forgetting their names at the moment. But anyway, anyone doing security management detection, you can use this right now. Think of it as like a middleware. And so go to our website. I'll give you the URL if you want it. And there's a whole page there on how you can use the API. There's actually languages, Python and a few others already in there ready to go. There's actually kind of a whole GitHub community on this where we're trying to potentially crowdsource interesting threat queries. So we're trying to create a community here of security hunters, security professionals who can collaborate and therefore collectivize security and help automate security, which is the one thing the attackers can't stand. So if nothing else, if you're responsible for security in your own environment, or if you are a security company, please consider using this. We don't charge for it. It's out there. We want our security community to do more with this. There's a whole community of partners using this. We recently launched offshoot of this as a kind of managed service offering, purposely with FireEye and with Symantec. So these are companies that some might say, well, these guys are your competitors. Well, that might be. We're co-opetition, whatever it is, we want to protect users. So we all have a great opportunity here to work together in using, use tools like these. Yeah. And I'm done. So, yes, this slide. One more. This one. Excuse me. Yep. Right. Yeah. Right. That's a great point. In our case, we definitely have a lot of DLP, RMS type offerings. We've actually unified them into one offering we call Microsoft Information Protection. The idea is secure collaboration, any device, pretty much any file format. But if you already have a partner doing this with you, Proofpoint, Cisco, we publish an SDK. Anyone can use it, and security company. I think the issue is that ultimately, even though we can all help, only you know how sensitive your data is to you. Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Companies that organizations have, they don't know how to classify tools. And there's great tools to do that, but they're really hard to use. They're hard to use across, assets, and particularly in assets that are unstructured data, stuff where you guys are taking a look at stuff you have in the house anyway, and by doing a lot of filtering.
So our own CISO, Brett, he readily talks to his counterparts about how he dreaded the day he had to roll this out internally, because he figured if my employees, or employees under his purview, if they resented or if they resisted the fact that we had a modicum of security controls or labeling, whatever, around their data, their objects, if they felt that we were putting too much security around them and preventing them from collaborating, we're on the east side of Seattle, they would cross the lake and go work for a certain bookseller on the west side. Okay, and so, and by the way, now Google's putting a huge campus next to Amazon. It's really kind of funny. So you're right. Yeah. Yep. That's a great question. Given, for example, the first presentation, there's definitely a chance here. I would say that as we rely more and more on proactive AI type tooling to help you configure systems, apps, identities, files that are going to have literally deep ACLs and deep controls around them. That's going to, a lot of that's just going to be automated by default. The monitoring will be automated by default. Yeah, there's a great opportunity to make this more gray. However, at the end of the day, the customer still owns their data. So that's a great point, though. I should have mentioned that. So the graph, you can see where the graph's coming from. Sorry, too many things in my hands here. Oh. Well, for example, so okay, here. So this is a Azure Active Directory. So think about the fact that we are generally the default identity provider. And so if you use Azure AD, we manage your identity service for you to an extent. And so we can, when your users authenticate, we can essentially compare that in real time, the IP address, the credential, the SaaS app that they want to access, and we can essentially put context from our other global collection to give you a kind of a trust or risk-based decision to make. Do we trust this? Well, let's let them through. That's Azure. We do a lot of work with botnets, going after botnets. You can see here, Windows 10 just crossed 800 million users. It's a fantastic source of insight. I hate to use the word intelligence in the DC area. I just don't want to. No, I didn't mean it that way. Sorry. I'm a former federal employee. I'm just saying we get really, really interesting insight out of what we can collect. We definitely are consistent with GDPR, other privacy requirements, but in devices, accounts. The install base, Windows Server 16, 19, Windows 7, 8.1, 10 around the world. Yeah, generally. And by the way, we work with DISA, we have STIGs, all these things that we do to encourage organizations to let us have a certain level of collection, because we can scan and clean in real time at scale and no one else can do. Ultimately, remember, all of our technologies ship with privacy, enabled by default. You make the decision to opt in. Yeah. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark. That was fantastic. So hopefully this gave you guys some new ideas around how you can actually leverage security to accelerate cloud adoption. So with that, we certainly don't want to stop our flow of ideas. So it is my honor and privilege to welcome Bob Osborne to the stage. So Bob actually is joins us from ServiceNow. So Bob was currently the Chief Technology for Federal for ServiceNow. And by way of background, Bob actually was my boss when I was over at NNSA. So Bob was served as the NNSA Chief Information Officer, and I served in the CTO's office under Bob. So it's my honor and privilege to welcome Bob here to the stage to talk about leveraging security to accelerate cloud adoption.
Thank you, Anil. And thank you, CSA DC, for having me, and to MITRE for hosting us. Great comments and presentations thus far. But as Anil could tell you, I like to look at things through a little bit different lens. So I'd just like to talk to you for a few minutes about some interesting aspects of security in the cloud around AI that I've been researching and writing on lately, and see if it spurs a few shared interests with you all as you go forward that you might want to explore as well. So, you know, there's a big wreck on the Beltway right now, and I'm a big user of virtual assistants in my life. Perhaps you are too. So I happen to carry around my personal assistant with me, and I communicate with her. I've changed her voice to this very attractive Australian lady. I had to have a conversation with my wife over that. She's not Australian. But we worked through it, and it's okay. But it's because I like that voice, right? It's pleasant to me.
I'm Australian. I have the same voice.
Exactly. And I admit I was attracted to you when you were speaking. So it's just how that goes, you know. I find that accent very appealing. It's pleasing to me. So I like to use this interface, and I say, hey Siri, you know, and she'll wake up and she'll answer questions for me. And now it's really cool because the technology has become a extension of my own digital persona. So now I have multiple accounts with different organizations that this device aggregates for me, and my virtual assistant will help me get information from all those data sources to help me make decisions in my personal life. And driving instructions are one of them. So I can tell her where I want to go, and she'll come up through an application, particularly, thank you, go back to sleep. She likes to listen in when I've got her on mute though. And I love Waze, so she'll come up through the Waze app and she'll give me driving instructions. And it's really cool because this device is aggregating information from a number of source systems to present them through this very attractive voice to me saying, hey, there's an accident up ahead, but you're still on the fastest route to get to your destination. Now, why does she tell me that I'm still on the fastest route? Because most of us humans think we're smarter than our technology, right? So over time, we've always tested it. How many of you have tested your guidance app? When you've given a route, you say, no, I know a faster way to get there. And over time, we've learned that, no, really, this is probably the fastest way. So we start to build trust in our technology. And because we've humanized the interface, now we start to have an emotional bond to this technology, which leads to additional adoption and trust, which could be a problem. So what do I mean by that? So let's go back to the foundation. So it's all about the data, and we've heard several examples of it, which I think is really cool. So, you know, Mark had the slide that had the like bazillion technologies for security on it. Wasn't that daunting? How many of you think that you understand all those technologies? How about 10% of those technologies? No. We're in a space today where, depending on what our role and responsibility is, there's far more information than we can ever even read, much less comprehend and take action on. So we need virtual assistants. We need computing power to help us. Virtual assistants that are based on machine learning and AI algorithms are really the key for us to move forward. Nowhere in no specialization is this any more true than cybersecurity. Understanding in this ever-growing complexity of the Internet of Things and the connectivity of multiple devices in an elastic boundary of an enterprise, is it going to be any more relevant for us to be able to respond at machine speed to intrusion? So in order to do that, we have to understand where our boundaries are, what data is in there, where are we pulling data from? And I heard that in a previous discussion as well. I thought it was really insightful, right? So think back to our example. Our platform is pulling information from multitudes of systems of record. So we have to have confidence in those source data sources that are being aggregated, that our virtual assistant is presenting to us for us to make a decision. So the higher confidence level we have, the more likely we are to act on what the recommendation is. The lower the confidence level, we're going to want to test it. We're going to want to make sure we understand that that data is actually trustworthy. This is critical when we're designing our architectures that are supporting our agencies, when you talk from a federal government perspective in particular, or any other highly regulated market. So there are, I'm sure you all have heard the term, inherently governmental functions, right? So those are the activities that can only be acted upon or decisions made by federal officials. Can't be delegated to contract support folks or anyone else. So there's always the saying, right? So you can delegate authority, but you never can delegate responsibility in a particular role for the federal government. So there are inherently governmental responsibilities. One of those for all IT professionals are understanding where your data resides and who has access to it. That's a fundamentally inherent governmental activity. As we start to get into AI and machine learning, I posit to you that there are inherently human activities that have to be defined. Just as we've defined inherently governmental activities, some decisions have to be reserved for humans. So once you accept that posit that there are inherently human decisions in any given organizational work stream, now you can begin to decide what is appropriate to put RPA in place, or any robotic functions or artificial intelligence, machine learning, decision-making trees at the lower level decision-making. So I believe we're actually going to redefine what are inherently governmental and inherently human decisions. As we become more comfortable, more confident in the data that's being aggregated and presented through our virtual assistants. So if you take that to the extreme, so how many of you are Star Trek fans? Yes! I knew I'd get a good response in this room. So who likes data? Yes. Who don't like data? Who doesn't like data? The persona of data. So why do you like data? Kind of funny, quirky. The human emotion we draw toward the human aspect of the android makes the interaction much more palatable to us. We like it. It's just like the platform that we carry with us, right? The voice type that we choose makes that interaction more pleasant for us, so we tend to use it more, and that generates trust. I'm going back into the original position I was having at the beginning of the talk. I think that's high risk, and here's why. So we have the ability today, when we run and deploy machine learning algorithms, to present results on that to support decision making with a confidence level that's expressed in a ratio, right? So this particular workflow response has an 80% confidence level of accuracy. And for that given decision, we may say that's good enough. And either I will act on that information that's presented to me, or I'll automate that if 80% is good enough. If it comes back 70%, I may still act on that in my decision, but I may act differently. But that may not be reliable enough. I may not have the confidence in that to fully automate that decision. I'll reserve that as an inherently human decision. That's if that data or that response from the AI is in visual and numeric form. What happens if it's presented through my favorite virtual assistant? I have a higher trust level, perhaps at a lower confidence level in the data. See where I'm going? So now I tend to like my interface. I trust that more because it's a human emotion that I'm interjecting into the equation that may drive me to override or accept a lower confidence level in the source data than I might have if it was presented in a visual and numerical fashion. I think that's fascinating.
I'm presuming your assistant never says, I'm not sure, Bob, but you might try this route.
She does sometimes. Sometimes she'll say, I don't know, which is, oh, that's okay. Because isn't that like real life as well? And that lends me to trust her even more when she gives me an answer. See, so that's where I'm going. So when you think about, if we don't fully understand what our source data is that's feeding into our enterprise, from which we're aggregating and normalizing that data to run the ML scripts on, that's presenting the recommendation to us to make that critical decision through a very interactive human-like interface, we're at risk. Therefore, the cybersecurity aspects of understanding all those areas, understanding where our boundaries are, what our data sources are, who has access to that, for each of the workflows that we're pulling from in order to have these automated decision-making capabilities become even exponentially more critical as we move into future capabilities. This is only going to be a greater challenge for us as we move beyond. You know, I always say this, when I was at Transcom before I joined Anil at NSA, you know, we created data warehouses, right? So databases weren't enough, we had to create data warehouses to have all the data, put BI layer on and all that stuff. Well, we get over to NSA, we got all the national lab data, which is a whole bunch of stuff, not as much as Microsoft is collecting. Holy cow. But it was a bunch of stuff, and it was a data lake now, right? And now we've got data oceans. So it's going to be the whole data universe. You get where I'm going with that, right? So we must use machine learning algorithms and AI to help us make decisions as humans. It's going to be critical that we identify those inherently human decisions, and I think we need to be aware of the interface and this relationship that we're creating with our technology, and that it doesn't lower our sensitivity to the confidence level in the source data. Any questions? Told you I'd make you think differently on this. I think absolutely it's something to consider, right? So as I said, as I'm researching and going through this, so I'll tell you a little story, which is where this really triggered off of my mind. So in January, I had the opportunity to speak out in Vegas at the CES for government conference, and I was on a panel there. And during that conference, I met Sophia. Everyone knows who Sophia is. She's the android who is actually a citizen, I think, of Saudi Arabia or Qatar. Saudi Arabia, yeah. She's actually a citizen. Well, I was a skeptic. Okay, I read about it. I'm like, yeah. Somebody just, typed in a whole bunch of responses into her, and it's kind of hokey. Well, she gave a 30-minute presentation and then responded to questions from the audience that included humorous responses. She'd chuckle, and she'd call the questioner by name and respond, and ha. Well, I found by the end of the presentation, I kind of liked her. It was really a little off-putting, you know what I mean? And that's what started this concept of thinking about this relationship, because I really hadn't thought about my response to data on TV or my response to Siri that I carry around. But when I interacted with Sophia, that really kind of made me step back and think, yeah, we need to be aware of this. If we're in the security business, if we're thinking about critical infrastructure, we're thinking about government, DoD, we're thinking about banking, we're thinking about pharma, where folks can get in and play with data to skew results that are being presented through this really cool interface that we trust, we might have a problem. Yeah.
Well, first off, thank you for coming to us today. Also, I'm very intrigued. So, do you know, was
I think I'm introducing it. It's pretty cool because I've done some research. It's like nobody's really written on this yet. So I've written a couple papers now, but I'm looking for more research to be done on it because I think the psychological, emotional aspect of the interface is going to be something that we really haven't thought through. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, wasn't that cool? Yeah. That's a great point and good insight. And I actually do another presentation on Internet of Things that delves into what you're talking about, right? So the introduction of devices within the enterprise is really going to be challenged. So the way that we think about security today, you know, you saw the presentation earlier with the moat of the firewall and how archaic is that, right? So we're still defending like castles instead of raising our bar and protecting the data and the applications. But think about IoT now from the perspective of wearables and implantables. So many of you have advanced security clearances like we did or have, and there are areas, even today as a visitor, if you go into the Pentagon and you have a meeting, you have to leave all of your devices in a locked box outside of an office. What do you do with your implanted device? How is that going to be handled? Right? So from a security perspective, now the game changes. Now that boundary has to have, well, I won't solution it for you, but it's going to be a challenge for us, right? So we have to acknowledge that. So as it becomes more and more an integrated, what's referred to, I'm sure you've heard of the augmented human. Will you have augmented devices and capabilities? Those are surgically implanted capabilities in people that are going to be in our workforce. And how do we deal with that? Yes, sir.
Right. So in your scenario, when we started, you're making the final decision and you're executing the final task.
Yes.
And Alexa is making a decision based on an incident that happened from the Weather Channel.
Yeah.
And when your pacemaker makes a decision on something that I heard on the Weather Channel.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got Nest, the thermostat in my house. Anybody else use Nest? It's really cool where you can, through your phone, you can adjust your temperatures and have it all programmed through your phone at your house, wherever your house is when you're traveling or whatever. So that's a great example because now you get inputs from external forces. I have to watch where I have my phone when I'm on a WebEx, right? Because she'll wake up and start helping me out on the WebEx. Sometimes that's good. It helps me out. But usually it's not that good. But it goes back to knowing where your data sources are that are connected within your enterprise. Because in the commercial application of our home life with Siri and Alexa and all of that, they're really connected to anything that's on the internet. So the stimuli can really generate some pretty interesting responses too. You see the commercial about the parrot that's in there yakking and Siri's going crazy on that? Yes, ma'am. That's right. Yeah, it's a different lens to view this new AI technology and the virtual assistant world that we're introducing, and agencies are embracing wildly, right? So platforms are bringing in as a native part of their capabilities machine learning and artificial intelligence and virtual assistants with voice recognition, natural language processing. So it's coming into the enterprise. Are we ready for it? Do we understand how we're going to, be aware of the capabilities and understand the security implications? So,
Hannah Fry wrote a book called Hello World, which addresses a lot of the things you're talking about. I don't know if you've seen that book.
no, I have to look at that.
It's really good. Hello World by Hannah Fry. It's
Yeah.
really very, very well done.
Super. Well, it's true in our human interactions, right? So we're really mimicking our human interaction with technology. So, if I like you, I'm going to trust you till you prove to me not to trust you, right? So that's a dangerous position when we talk about our AI and data. I like that. I like that. That sounds like a challenge. Thank you, everyone.
Can I always rely on Bob for great questions and great ideas for us to think about. So how many of y'all left with some thoughts to think about? There we go. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to all our speakers, our sponsors, for us to really think about what are some new ways for us to address the problems around security and privacy and functionality. And, it almost sounds like a new research topic, right? Because it was brought up, right? Has there been any real research around this topic, around, the transit of trust between the machine and the human, right? So, and not only that, where are the actual regulations around that? Have they been defined? Well, if there hasn't been research, there probably aren't regulations. This might be an opportune topic for us to have as a chapter research topic. How many of y'all would be interested in something like that? All right, well, great. See me afterwards. We can have a conversation around what that might look like. So, because these are the types of problems that we want to solve as a chapter, right? When we bring up these types of issues, these are issues that affect our world. Our world is changing. Digital assistants are becoming the natural norm. As we start putting our trust in technology, what's that fine line? So thank you for bringing up that topic and that thought. These are things that we as a chapter can fundamentally solve and influence those that are writing the legislation that are going to affect our world. So with that, Katie Lewin unfortunately is stuck in that inner loop of the Beltway traffic, as is one of our board members. So I'm going to breeze through this, which is why I let our speakers talk a little longer, and talk about what our research topic is that will be talked about in detail at our federal forum, the CSA Federal Forum. So how many of y'all are familiar with FedStar? Okay, we got a handful of hands. So FedStar, if you're familiar with FedRAMP, is obviously a program that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. The CSA STAR registry is something that CSA has that is actually a program that CSA is looking to establish mutual recognition between CSA STAR and the FedRAMP program, right? So there's a common criteria, CCM, the Cloud Controls Matrix, which is a matrix of controls across a variety of standards. This is to establish areas of mutual recognition between those that are compliant in the CSA STAR registry and the FedRAMP program. So you don't have to go through that CNA process multiple times. So there has been a pilot done of this program, and that pilot will actually be discussed at the CSA Federal Forum. So if you want to know more about what that mutual recognition might look like, I encourage you to come to the CSA Federal Forum in May. Forget the date. Say again? May 7th. Thank you. Appreciate that. So, but the goal is to, again, establish some sort of mutual recognition between CSA STAR and FedRAMP. This effort is actually being led by CSA Global. So Global is actually the one that's been doing the research on this, but they are relying on our chapter to rely or to validate the veracity of that research. So for those that are interested in reviewing that research and reviewing the output of that that pilot, certainly let us know, join the chapter, and we can definitely weave you into reviewing the mapping that has been done to date between CSA, CCM controls, and FedRAMP, and the output of that pilot. So these are opportunities, again, for us as a chapter to fundamentally solve problems together. There was this focus group. It's already been done. I'm going to skip through some of these. The gap analysis has been created, both part 1 and part 2. You'll see the pilot reports at the CSA Federal Forum, and the group is stood up. So we do need that input from multiple stakeholders. That's the opportunity for this group to come in and get engaged. So for those that want to do so, please do see either myself or Kim or Mari, Dr. Mari Spina in the back from MITRE, and we can certainly get you connected with the group that is working on that effort. So I'm going to skip these next couple slides here because we don't have the folks here to help with that. And I'm going to talk about our next event, which appropriately Bob actually teed up very well, which is, we talk about security, right? But the inverse of that is, how does that affect our privacy, especially with the advent of digital assistants that are always listening, right? We have Alexa in our home, we have Siri or Google Assistant in our pockets. What is the boundary of security and privacy, right? So we're going to have a very interesting panel around what that's going to look like. On Thursday, June 13th, it'll actually be in DC. So this chapter rotates between DC, Virginia, and Maryland. So this was our Virginia meetup. So this meetup will be in DC on Thursday, June 13th. So please mark your calendars. It'll be posted on meetup.com. So that's the place to go to sign up. And we'll have a panel of speakers that will line up to talk about, again, what that boundary looks like between security and privacy. So with that, did you all find this event useful? Great. Fantastic. Well, again, thank you again to our sponsors, and we encourage you guys to stick around. We still have some refreshments, I hope, left over. If so, network with your colleagues here, and if you haven't signed up for the chapter, please do so. Thank you again for your time, and safe travels home.